Hey, beautiful people. Today's video, I don't know why I'm all of a sudden going down this journey of sharing this stuff, but here I am. I'm here to do it. Okay, so caveat to watching my videos if you haven't seen any of them before. We have guinea fowl and roosters, and they are usually just outside the back door, and they are always loud. So you'll probably hear a rooster and a guinea fowl, maybe a few roosters because we have five. Um, So this video is exactly what the title said, which is basically my failed home birth. I really want to talk about it because I don't really see that many people talking about failed home births, and they're really they're really hard to find peace with and find forgiveness and acceptance. And if you haven't had a failed home birth or you haven't tried for a home birth and you went for a hospital birth, that's welcome. If you've had a failed hospital birth, it didn't go as planned, then feel free to listen along, because I think birthing is, it's the hardest thing. I know that people say that it is meant to be the most natural and easiest thing for a woman to do, but for some of us it's not that easy, and it is really not that natural. And my story was I wanted to share it and then share what happened to me afterwards. So my story was I had always planned, I've been planning a home birth since I was in my 20s, and then by the time I had my daughter, I was 39. So it had been a long time that I decided I was going to have a home birth. I was adamant that I was having a home birth, and I intended that. And I had a midwife, and she was amazing, and we connected. And I really struggle with people, trusting people. I struggle with people, allowing people into my space, and especially into my personal space. So to have a midwife and to be having a baby was a big thing. And then when I was about 2 weeks out from having this baby, my midwife got some kind of stomach, I don't know, infection. She had to have surgery. So I was, what was I, 39? I think it was 38 weeks or something. Like I was due, and she couldn't be my midwife anymore. And I had spent all of this time building up a relationship with her and building up the trust and building up the connection and building up the rapport. And I knew that I was safe with her. And then I didn't have her anymore. And that was really the start of the end, because then I had to go through this process of my cat's going to walk past the thing, because then I had to go through this process of finding a midwife, which isn't easy over here in Australia to start with. You normally have to book within a couple of weeks of finding out you're pregnant. So it was a miracle that I found one. Um, but I hadn't built the rapport. I had only seen her twice, and then my water broke. And I didn't know anything about this woman. She didn't know anything about me. She just knew I wanted to have a home birth, and that was that was it. So I woke up at about 1:30 in the morning, and sorry for my cat. There's usually going to be one. I woke up, I think, 1:30 in the morning. My waters broke, and by 8 o'clock, 7:30, something like that. It's early in the morning. I was fully dilated. So I was fully dilated within a couple of hours. And I heard the midwife say, give it a couple more hours and we'll have a baby. This is the easiest. This is the easiest job I've ever had. And I don't know if it was something that she said that triggered something in my brain to go, oh, hang on a minute. This is easy. This is happening. This is simple. And what I do understand about myself is that my pattern and my program is for things to be hard. Is if I'm going to do something, it needs to be hard. It can't be easy. I'm not allowed to have easy. Easy is unacceptable in my world. If I'm going to do something, then it needs to be hard. And if I get punished for it, then added bonus. That's just an added bonus to the world. If I get punished for doing something that's hard. And within, think about 20 minutes to half an hour after she said that, my contraction stopped. My daughter's head was already like it was on its way. And the midwife actually said to me, why don't you put your hand in and feel? You can feel her head. So why don't you feel her head and bring her out, draw her out? And I remember there was this moment where, and I knew this was coming. I saw this probably a week or two before I actually heard there's going to be this moment where you have a choice to make, and you've got two pathways, and one will take you down the easy pathway and one is going to take you down a much harder pathway. And when I got to this crossroad and I looked, I chose out of fear. I think there was a part of me, because I'm so programmed to doing things hard, I think I was afraid to choose the easy route. And also because whenever anything has come easily to me, I usually get punished due to, let's call it, jealousy from people that were in my environment who didn't like how easy things came to me. So there was a lot of jealousy, which then stemmed into punishment. And so my daughter got stuck and I couldn't get her out. And I was pushing for hours and she wouldn't come out. And then my midwife, who turned into a dragon, I remember her saying to me, if you don't get her out in the next 10 minutes, I will personally throw you onto an ambulance. Like, she was a real piece of work. I didn't know this at the time, but she was nasty. And yeah, I couldn't get her out. I was so heartbroken and so exhausted from pushing as long as I had been, and just nothing, like my contractions they just stopped. And of course, when I'm in this moment, this is me looking back going, this is why I did this. I could see the two crossroads. I wasn't sitting there. I was in the birthing pool at home at this stage. And I wasn't sitting there going, oh, there are two crossroads. So which one do I choose? Do I choose the one of fear, or do I choose the one that's easy? It wasn't a conscious choice. It was just me reacting in each moment of fear, because I was surrounded by people I didn't know. I had support from people I didn't know. They were really aggressive towards me and getting angry because I wasn't birthing as fast as they thought I was going to birth. And so, yeah, I ended up in the hospital, and it was hard because I got everything I didn't want. I ended up with an epidural, and so I ended up with an epidural, and I ended up with my daughter came out with forceps because I couldn't actually push. I ended up tearing from asshole at breakfast time, and I ended up with hundreds of stitches. Everything had to get stitched back up again. It was it was so unpleasant. And then because I decided on a lotus birth, which, if you don't know what a lotus birth is, it's when the cord and the placenta stay attached after the baby's born, instead of cutting it straight away or even doing a delayed cut. You don't cut it at all. You leave it there and let it naturally fall off. And I had to fight for that because now I'm in hospital. And the pediatrician, while my daughter was being pulled out of me with forceps, came in, and she was on a mission to take my daughter, and she had the scissors. And I said, what are they for? And she goes, oh, I'm going to cut the umbilical cord to take her over to the table. And I said, no, you're not. She goes, oh, yes, I am. I said, no, you're not. And I had to fight for that. And the way I fought for it, just in case anyone is watching this and wants to know, how did you get a full natural lotus birth in hospital, which is really uncommon now, especially now. It was actually a real challenge. But what I said to her was that I knew that the placenta keeps a baby alive for 2 minutes. It's about 2 minutes after a baby comes out. And I said to her, I know that my daughter will stay alive for 2 minutes. You've got 2 minutes to check her. If she comes out blue, we will have a very quick conversation about what you're going to do. But right now, you don't know what color she's coming out. You don't know what's wrong with her. You can check her while she's on me. And so she did. She did check her while she was on me, and she was fine. Nothing wrong with her. But then I had 3 days in hospital, and I hadn't planned for a hospital birth. I had planned for a home birth. So I didn't have anyone. I didn't have any clothes. I had nothing. I had no support, no family. My mom was freaking in Japan at the time because she planned a trip away she planned a trip away, and I was late. I was 2 weeks late. So she had planned, obviously she didn't plan to go away when I was meant to be due. She planned to go away 2 weeks after. And it just so happened that I gave birth that week that she was away. So happy days for that. And yeah, then I had 3 days in the hospital of not really being able to eat the food because I was gluten-free and dairy-free, and also really only wanted to eat organic. So I ate as little as I possibly could just to keep myself alive. I also had real problems breastfeeding and having my daughter latch on. So that was really challenging. And then I also had a nurse that wanted to keep taking her away. Said, well, let's just put her in this plastic, whatever it is, cot, and we'll just wheel her out to the nursery with all the other babies. And I wouldn't let her go. I wouldn't put her down. And one nurse who had so much attitude said, well, I'll just come and take her away while you're asleep. I said, no, you don't. So I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I heard someone come in, I'd open my eyes and go, I'm like, you're not taking her. And then thankfully on day 3, I got out. And I got home, and then I guess the recovery started. I couldn't sit because I had stitches up the wazoo. I had so many stitches I couldn't actually sit, and then that made breastfeeding really hard. I didn't have any support because the person that I was living with, weirdly enough, didn't want anything to do with the baby. She didn't want anything to do with me. She was so excited about me giving birth, but then after I gave birth, she kind of changed a little bit and offered me no help. She didn't want to hold my daughter. She wouldn't hold my daughter so I could shower. So I didn't shower for, I think, 3 months. I just kind of had to wash the important parts because if I got into the water and I put my daughter down, she would scream. And I understand that some people are quite happy to put their kids down and walk away and let them scream, but I am not one of those parents. And so I didn't shower for months. I just washed what I could in the time that I had. My daughter also had a tongue tie, which I didn't know about. And that was why I was having latching issues. But interestingly enough, I did go and see a breastfeeding consultant, and my daughter was feeding 14 to 16 hours a day. She would latch on, and then while she was asleep, she would stay latched on. So then when my milk came out, she would drink while she was asleep. And when I went and saw the breastfeeding consultant, she actually said to me, look, if you had not done that, she would not be alive. Can you hear these guinea pigs? I don't know if you can hear them. They're so loud. They're right out the back door. So I hope you can hear what I'm saying. Oh, that's better. They just stopped. Yeah, so she said that if I hadn't let my daughter feed the way I was while she was asleep, she would have been in hospital on a drip, because most babies that have tongue ties that are put onto a feeding schedule, especially if they have a tie like my daughter did, they just can't get the milk that they need to get in that allotted time that parents give. And she's seen so many end up in hospital. So she says to me, as long as you can keep feeding her the way you're feeding her, and you can sustain that level of feeding for hours and hours and hours, all during the day and night, she said, keep doing it, because otherwise you are going to have to either bottle feed, or she'll have to go to hospital and go on a drip. So that wasn't an option. Yeah, and I guess the hardest part wasn't the home birth being failed. It was people's reactions to the home birth. So someone that I had, a friend at the time, she was actually a midwife, and I had asked her to be my midwife, but she said no. because of the friendship that we had. And afterwards, when I told her what happened, she looked so disgusted, and she looked at me and she said, I would never go to hospital for a birth, ever. She said, I would rather die than go to hospital for a birth. And the guilt that I felt and the shame that I felt for making the choice that I made. And then I had another friend whose son got stuck, and she said, oh yeah, my son got stuck, but I just walked for 12 hours while he was stuck. She said, I wasn't going to hospital. I stayed at home and I birthed my son at home. And I'm looking at both of these two women going, well, one, you've got partners that can advocate for you and that can fight for you, but also support you, feed you. It would be okay if a midwife left until another one came because your husband was there, and you had someone that you trusted, that you felt safe with throughout your entire birth. And it really kind of almost humbled me to start to realize how opinionated I had been, about how adamant I had been about having a home birth. And it actually really, really taught me to stop being so opinionated about things, stop being so absolute about things, and stop judging people because they do things that does not fit my own personal box. It really made me realize how hurtful that was. And because I sat back and I looked and I went, well, it's okay for you from your ivory tower of privilege to say that you would rather die. But what I realized was, until someone is actually in that situation, and whether this is home birthing or whether it's some other kind of illness, or whether it's working and deciding whether you're going to leave but then running out of money, or work in a job you don't like, or whatever your situation is, be in a relationship where you're unhappy because that's your circumstance. Whatever it is, I don't think there's anyone that can really form a judgment or an opinion unless they've actually personally gone through it themselves and they understand. And then usually they're a lot more sympathetic than people that haven't gone through it. And it really showed me how much of a judgmental bitch I'd been towards other mothers, because I had been of that opinion during my birthing, when I heard other mothers say that they went to hospital or they couldn't breastfeed after a couple of weeks. And I would say, I would just suffer through it. And I will say I did suffer through breastfeeding my daughter. When her tongue tie started to get too tight, it would feel like someone was snapping a rubber band on my nipple, and I'd have to go into the osteopath and get her worked on. So I knew when she needed to go to the osteopath because it hurt. And I did make the choice to suffer through that. But I also had a solution, which was an osteopath. And not all mothers have that solution. It just so happens that there was an osteopath within a 20-minute drive from my house that specialized in tongue ties, and I never got it cut. So that was a gift, to have that experience, to have access to that kind of person. But I realized not all mothers do. And not all mothers have access to be able to home birth. And not all mothers have access to having partners that help them feel safe. And it really grounded me and brought me back down to earth, and really started to crumble my very judgmental, opinionated walls, where I used to think if somebody doesn't eat only organic food, then there's something wrong with them. But now I'm of the opinion where I think, no. Some of us are privileged enough to have access to organic food and to be able to eat it every single day. But that doesn't mean everyone can. And that does not mean that someone else is bad and should be shamed for the fact that they can't. And it kind of seems silly, but it just really humanized me. My whole birthing and breastfeeding journey really humanized me and made me realize that not everybody has the same privileges that I had to be able to afford a midwife in the first place. Because the first one I had was free. It was through the hospital. But when that one couldn't stay, and I really didn't like the two midwives that the hospital had, I had to go private, and private was $5,500. And I was in a very privileged position to have a mum who had that kind of money, and she gave me the money so I could pay for the home birth. And it's just been little things like this that have really made me realize that sometimes some people are sitting in their ivory tower from a very privileged position, being extraordinarily judgmental and opinionated about what people are doing without even understanding what it actually feels like when you're in that situation. And I think the last 9 years has really humanized me in that perspective of realizing that there've been so, and I'll get into other stories around my mum passing away and what happened there. But there are lots of other experiences where people have judged me based on my reactions and formed really strong opinions about me based on my reactions, and me sitting there going, you have no idea. I had friends who had never lost parents. They had their mum and their dad judging me for the way I was reacting to watching my mum die over a 3-year period. And my dad passed when I was 30. So it was realizing that I was going to lose both parents, and people who had both parents looking at me and judging me for the fact that I was slowly losing control and going out of my mind, not knowing what I was going to do with a newborn baby and no parents. That it made me realize that when you sit from your ivory tower and you form an opinion about someone on something that you have never actually gone through yourself, you're doing that from a very privileged position. And this whole, this was the start of humanizing me and making me become a lot less judgmental and a lot less opinionated about why people do what they do and why people choose what they choose. I know this has kind of gone on a bit of a tangent, but I think that's kind of it. That's what I wanted to say. I wanted to share my home birthing experience. I wanted to share how people made me feel, or not how they made me feel, but how I felt from people's comments. And what I learned, and the pain that you go through when you have a failed home birth. It's not only the physical pain that you go through, because it is physically painful when you tear. Or I know people obviously that have had C-sections that weren't intending on having them, and the shock of that, the shock of not being prepared for what happens to their body from having a C-section, and the changes that they have to make over the next 6 weeks that they weren't planning on changing or making because it happened unprepared. And yeah, I wanted to share that, and also how other people's reaction to it, and how judgmental that was, and how insensitive that was. And so I guess I just wanted to share, birthing is hard for some of us, and especially when you're older as well. I was 39 when I had my daughter, so my body was not bouncing back after that. I didn't know that at the time. And I say to my daughter frequently, if you're going to have a baby, make sure you have it before you're 25, because then shit's going to bounce back. But when you're 39 and you have a baby, if you aren't already on a really good health regime, which I was not, then stuff does not bounce back afterwards. Shit falls. And I will talk about, so I ended up with a prolapse uterus as well, which I will talk about. But interestingly enough, I don't necessarily believe that 100% came from the birth of my daughter, because my uterus didn't actually prolapse until after my mom got sick. And when my daughter was 4 months old, and after I found out that she was going to pass away. So I think that my prolapse uterus came more from my mum getting sick, but there was already a weakness in my body because I just given birth. I just given birth, and I was still healing from the birth. So there was a weakness, and that's where my energy dropped, my connection. just fell out of my body. um, yeah, I think that's kind of it. Anyway, I'm not going to ramble because I can ramble. Thank you so much for watching. You are so greatly appreciated in this world. And yeah, that's it. Thanks. Bye.